Good evening, Canton South Wildcats. Mr. Brickwood here. Hope all are staying healthy, most importantly, and your family staying healthy in this living history that we're in. And we're going to be tackling the Age of Enlightenment, and I'm going to do the best I can to give you some context. As you guys know, I've been doing a lot of reading, trying to get a better grasp of having the big picture of these things. And when I'm thinking about the time period we're in now, and I compare it to the things of the past, we need to make sure we're conscious of the fact that we know we're part of a living history of the coronavirus going on. We're talking the Renaissance and Reformation and Enlightenment. A lot of people were not conscious that that was the era because it was coined that after the fact. Many decades, centuries later. So do understand that you guys are living in we are living in a very unique time. So without further ado, I want to get into the lecture. I know I've gone over some of this stuff in class before, but I've added some details. I've got some more information. And I've actually already done a lecture, but I don't think it was good enough. And I was having some technical difficulties, so I'm starting all over. And please bear with me. I'm going to expect that you guys get these notes down, copied. I will give you the date on Schoology on when they're due. I do not want to see my notes because I will give you the slideshow. I do not want to see my notes. I want to see your notes, your words, because my notes will be at the bottom of the slides. But again, I expect that you put in your own words what it is I'm lecturing. Now, if you look at the slides at the bottom, the guided notes, and you hear what I'm saying, some of the stuff will line up. I'll miss a lot. I have a lot of information on there, and I'll expect you to know all that stuff. I'm just going to go over kind of the main stuff. If I could remember all that stuff in my head, I would tell you it all, but it is in front of you. If you want to look, if you're interested to know some more details that I kind of omit in this presentation, either for time or for the sake of not bogging you down too much. Now, I would be standing up, but I cannot because I do not have my clicker. So, I am wearing my dress-up gear. I don't want to disappoint Micah. I guess you said you made a character with my vest on and stuff, so I felt honored. So I don't want to change my get up in your game. So anyhow, without further ado, we're going to be looking at this continent in this unit primarily. We will jump across the Atlantic. We will jump to the Middle East a little bit, but primarily we're focused right in Europe. If I'm being specific, we're going to be focused from Spain to England to France to Germany and a little bit of Poland. Oh, can't forget the boot, Italy as well. So we look here, this is primarily Western Europe, be considered geographically. I guess a little bit of Central Europe as well, if we get all the way over here to Poland, right in this area. So we look here at this. We go through this units. There's about 130 slides, so I apologize in advance if that's too long for anybody. Again, I'll try to move efficiently. Some slides are obviously will be longer than others. This one's obviously going to be longer than most because it's introduction. But give you context, we're looking at this Mona Lisa, Da Vinci. It'll all start with the Renaissance. You're looking at the 14th century, 15th century. It will jump over to the printing press outside of Germany. You'll see about the same time, about 50 years after the printing press, you'll see this homeboy, Christopher Cologne, who we call Christopher Columbus today, will convince Ferdinand and Isabella to allow him to travel across the Atlantic Ocean, making Spain a lot of money. By the way, if you see anybody barge through that door behind me, it's because my kids aren't listening very well. Actually, my dog wants to get in, so hold on. Making Spain a lot of money. Tons of gold, tons of silver. They know we're bringing that back over in the boatloads. And from that, we will see Shortly thereafter, within about 20 years, you will see this guy post 95 Theses on a door in Wittenberg, Germany. So this will be Martin Luther. Right about 20 years after that, 30 years after that, we see Copernicus from Poland. He's going to challenge the geocentric model and introduce us to the heliocentric model. There, we're going to head Spanish Armada briefly. We will see Spanish Armada sent up to crush England, met by England's arguably greatest leader in the long history of the country, Queen Elizabeth I. And you will see her navy defeat the Spanish Armada, leading the shift. And if I was to make this a little bit better, seeing the shift from gold from the Spain to England and a lot of territory in the New World. Following that, you'll see Enlightenment pop up both in France and England. We talked about that with the coffee houses. And then we see eventually England will be home to the Industrial Revolution. So that is that. We're looking at, be conscious of the fact that when we're talking about the Age of Enlightenment, we are going to be focused on the West, the Western Hemisphere, looking at Western Europe to the United States, not the Far East. And I think it's a shame. This is something I need to make sure I polish up on more. But the state standards really focus on the Western Hemisphere. Do know there's a big, dark spot for the Eastern Hemisphere. And we see Confucius, Buddha, some other great philosophers of the past. You can see here, the man who asks a question is a fool for a minute. The man who does not ask a question is a fool for life. So just make sure, again, do the best you can. I try to tell my own children when they go to school, ask good questions. Not to have a good day, ask good questions, because ultimately that's where we learn. We're going to be focused more on Aristotle, the founding of the Western civilization in ancient Greece. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. Again, take these 2 quotes and try to apply them to your life. We need to remind ourselves going to this unit, no man is an island unto himself, no woman, no man is an island unto him or herself. Remind yourself that we need others to help us throughout our whole life, and we get places because of others. And we need to make sure we understand the same as needs to be viewed through the lens of history, in the sense of no epic, no age is in and of itself. There's bigger picture. There's a cause and effect in history. And we look at that cause and effect. We look at decisions made. We look at time periods. We need to make sure we understand context. That's that background information that matters. I thought this was a great visual I just found off the internet. Context matters. That pizza, for example, the plate versus the road, it matters if you're going to take a bite out of that or not. Make sure we view history the same way. Before we judge these people, get to know the context. This is why I try to do a lot of reading independently. So I'm finding that context, because that's really what motivates me, is knowing the background, because that's where all the cool stuff's at, in my opinion. Now, we need to also play the role of geography. If we go back to that map at the beginning here, you need to make sure we understand geography plays a role in all of this, whether it's the the Renaissance in Italy. It has a lot of new ideas coming. It's, Florence, it's a city that's going to allow for a lot of trade and globalization early on, which is going to allow it open to new ideas. And if we look at, for example, the age of exploration, Spain will have a head start to the New World, they call it, even though it was really 2 old worlds colliding with the Native Americans and the Europeans. But this discovery of the New World, look at geography. It's the closest to the United States in continental Europe. And we also see England will have a leg up, France will have a leg up over these Eastern European countries. And this is going to give them a big head start into becoming a very powerful nation in the long run. So make sure we understand geography plays a role in history. As we know we started the year out with Miss Bird on that. Another concept of history, make sure we understand power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We're going to look at the age of the Reformation, which will precede the Age of Enlightenment and Scientific Revolution. We need to look at Reformation is going to challenge church. The church is going to have a lot of power it's going to be corrupted by that power. And I say it, I mean many of its leaders, whether it's the popes, to the cardinals, to the bishops, to the priests. So we look at this, not everybody, but again, history is very general. It's oversimplified, which I'll get to in a second. And then we also think of absolute power. We think of the monarchs, absolute monarchs, the kings and queens, the princes, the aristocracy. These people have a lot of power in a day. The peasants have very little until they come together and they challenge the system, which we'll see happen in a few states, a few places, I should say. But you will see Enlightenment really challenge the government, the expectations of the government. Now, causation is important in history. We have cause and effect. We'll see that here in a second. And then we need to make sure this causation, oftentimes it's oversimplified, but nonetheless, one plus one does lead to two. So we have this sometimes indirect, oftentimes direct relationship between two events. For example, we get to the American Revolution. We'll look at how the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, as you probably know it as, led to the American Revolution, and how the American Revolution led to the French Revolution. So we have this causation, and the French Revolution will lead to the Reign of Terror and eventually Napoleon. And then Napoleon will eventually lead to other things transpiring that lead to bigger events, short-term and long-term in history. Now, lastly, or second to last, I think, we're looking at psychology. I always think psychology is so cool. Studying psychology is fantastic in the sense of you get a better grasp of history. And you're looking on the right here. This is Maslow, M-A-S-L-O-W, hierarchy of needs. And I look at how this plays a role in history, and especially this time period, because we're going to go from the Dark Ages up through Enlightenment. And we understand that during the Dark Ages, a lot of people struggle in everyday survival. So as a result, what Maslow argues is we can never reach our full potential until we meet the needs underneath. For example, the basic needs of food, water, and shelter, right? We need that before we worry about being secure and safe. And once we have our safety needs met, we will have a belongingness, love, and needs, intimate relationships. And then once we have that, we worry about status. And after status, then we can worry about our full potential. So we need to understand, we get to the Dark Ages, people are struggling down here to survive. So they're not having that sense of worrying about the future, where their full potential will be met. They're focused on the everyday. So do understand how psychology plays a role in history. I think this is a great picture of it. Psychology is at the root of history. So please make sure we see the big picture. Just always looking for that whenever you're reading or dissecting or curious in something. And then in closing here with the big picture, please understand again, historians like to make things nice and neat, put things in nice and neat catalogs. This was Renaissance, this was Reformation, this was Scientific Revolution, this was Enlightenment. We understand it's after reading this stuff, it's all blur. It all blends together because it happens on top of each other, really in the same time periods. When historians label these things, they're labeling it in hindsight. They're labeling it decades out. Looking back, they do say history is not really something that takes place until 20 years later, when we're far enough away from it, our emotions are far enough away from it, that we can look at it objectively. And then another 20 to 50 years after that, there's another thing called historiography, where you're looking back at it again, and you got new evidence, and you're combing through other stuff, and you have a different picture, different argument. So that'll be something more for you CCP people when you get to CCP. Now, going to our Enlightenment now, dare to know, have the courage to use your own intelligence. Kant, he's somebody who actually labels Enlightenment, the Age of Enlightenment, and he is something, I think this is something that's kind of a subtle underlying thing with all of this, is use this stuff to enhance you. Dare to know, have the courage to use your own intelligence. I just think it's important, it's imperative, and if you look at the education that these people who are seeking this knowledge out are those who are going to become known. They're the ones who reach their full potential. They'll be the ones who have status and clout in their day. So do understand, be curious. Dare to Know in that book, Enlightenment Now. Now, another thing we talked about, I already mentioned this with the guy traveling to the Dalai Lama, telling him everything he's learned. And the Dalai Lama filling his cup overflowing and kind of telling him that you have to empty your cup first before I can fill it, before I can give you knowledge. And we ourselves need to do the same. We need to empty our cup. And then everybody is ignorant only on different subjects. I think this illustration is a good job. We get into the scientific revolution specifically, but also we get an enlightenment. This is just a great reminder when we think about people, how smart they are. Sometimes we give them too much credit. This illustration does a good job of just reinforcing how little we know. And really, this is going to be what really kicks off the scientific revolution, is this idea of people admitting that they're the yellow dot. And you're going to see people exploring those outer areas to find out more. And we have people today, and hopefully you're one of these people, who are still pushing themselves to find more information about what they don't know. Now, we talked about the Garden of Eden, biblical tale, talking about the apple and the serpent, and talking about this tree of knowledge. And people seek this tree. They're curious about the tree. They're curious about the apple. And we see Adam and Eve, but we see also this tree of knowledge, that people are drawn to knowledge naturally. So make sure you're asking those questions, whether you believe it or not. It's not the case, not the point. The point is whether or not are you asking those questions? Are you being curious? And oftentimes we're going to be talking about the Reformation. We'll talk about these different things. Do understand we are drawn to the serpent. We're drawn to the more horrific things sometimes. We look at our news. Why does the news show that? Because we are drawn to it. They make money off of it. So we look at this. Be curious. Getting into Francis Bacon. This is the father of the scientific method. This is a guy who argued that we need to experiment. We need to look for truth, not for truth itself, but we need to use knowledge to empower us. Talked about utility. The only thing we need utility, or only we need knowledge for, is so we can utilize it in our lives. We can actually apply it. That's what applied knowledge makes power, not knowledge in and of itself. And with that knowledge, that empowerment, we're going to get more confident. And again, if you look at these people, they are teaching us how to lead our lives and how to be better and more confident in our everyday. Because we know life is a long road, and we're always seeking that confidence in the moment. This is where that knowledge, that applied knowledge, will carry you through. Francis Bacon, unfortunately, the father of the scientific method, he'll actually die, and given one of his experiments, he'll get bronchitis because of it, and it wasn't something you bounced back from back in the day, I guess, huh? So looking at the cause and effect, we're going to look at the Renaissance and how the Renaissance led to the Reformation, and how the Reformation really, we could look again, and this is loose here, but how it led to the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution will lead to enlightenment, and enlightenment will lead to three revolutions: the American, the French. Obviously, we have Napoleon, so looking at cause and effect. We have the Haiti Revolution, which will help us purchase Louisiana territory, and then we also have Latin American revolutions as well. So without the Enlightenment, without the language of enlightenment, we don't have these revolutions. Without the scientific revolution, we don't have the industrial revolution, where we're going to mass produce things. Without it, we don't have the imperialism, where countries are going to get really powerful and then go seek out and conquer other countries' land and resources. Dark chapter in human history. This will lead to the increase of slavery and the exploitation of people. Now we have one of the Renaissance artists, Da Vinci, Leonardo, the same guy who painted the Mona Lisa. He's going to be somebody who doesn't do a lot of paintings, does a lot of drawings in his time. He's more of a tinkerer. He likes to invent. He does a lot of different things, kind of a jack of all trades kind of guy. But he's going to come up with a lot of drawings. And three of them I thought were cool or interesting was a helicopter. He's going to draw well before his time. This guy's around the 1400s. He's going to draw a U-boat or a submarine, and he's also going to draw a machine gun. These are all early things, an automobile as well. So Da Vinci, he's somebody who's very creative, ahead of his time. And these things obviously come to light. Helicopters can come to a little bit later. These things come to light during the First World War. We'll see the machine gun used on a massive scale. We'll see a glimpse of the Gatling gun in the 1800s, but we see on a massive scale in the early 1900s. We have the submarines. We have, because of the machine gun, really, primarily, we see it's very difficult to get across no man's land and actually engage and throw those people out of the trenches. So we have a stalemate. It's very bloody, long. And we eventually have a Treaty of Versailles. And without these things, we don't have Adolf Hitler. And without Adolf Hitler, we don't have a Holocaust. And without an Adolf Hitler, we don't have the atomic bomb developed in 1945. So without that, we are unable to, so we see this. Hopefully you guys are seeing the connection, how history plays a role, how it's kind of like causation. We talked about this. Maybe give your parents this riddle. Abraham Wald, returning American planes after bombing German cities, 1943 in Columbia University. Here's the data they're looking at. Where do you add the armor based off of the bullets holes in the plane? Where do you add the armor? You can't add it everywhere because it will fly too slow and it won't be able to travel the great distances. So, riddled in that. And you'll see how math is used, scientific revolution, all that stuff. Now, we also have the scientific revolution. This cause and effect will help us get to the moon with Apollo 11, 1969. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin will land on the moon. And also something relevant today, you're looking at the coronavirus. The microorganisms, the viruses, were able to find these things, discover these things, have the knowledge because of the past. And nobody says it better than Isaac Newton, one of those scientific revolution thinkers around during the age, a little bit before the age of Enlightenment. But you're looking at, he was able to do all these things because he stood on the shoulders of giants. And our more modern scientists, whether it's Max Weber or Albert Einstein, it's because they stood on the people before them. And our scientists today who are attempting to solve this, immortality, which means that you can live forever in the sense of you won't die a natural death, these people are standing on the shoulders of those scientists before them to help solve these problems. And when they go, there'll be their successors will stand on the past as well. So just see the cause and effect of history. It's kind of cool stuff in my opinion. Now, before we get into all these different things, immortality, which we won't get into, but we get into the Renaissance, we get into the Reformation, all these things we need to look at, we first have to admit that we need to grow, we need to learn more. And this goes back to where we're going to start, ancient Greece, and this is looking at Socrates, who mentions, we talked about him earlier in the year, know thyself. And that's where we need to go seek is ourselves, get to know yourself. This is why we did the coat of arms. And there's a famous story that he goes to the Delphi and he asked who's the wisest person in the ancient Greece or Greece at the time or Athens. And she tells him that he is Socrates. And then he goes on his journey. He does not believe. And he's going to knock door to door to find the wisest people in the villages around the area. And he comes to find out after asking them questions that he is the wisest person in. Only one to admit that he does not know. So again, there's wisdom in that, because if you admit you do not know, you're not afraid to venture out and find out. Now, ancient Greece, we're looking at, these are the philosophers who set a very solid foundation for Western civilization to stand on. And you can go back to, you got Socrates, you got Plato, you got Aristotle. Aristotle is going to be the guy who teaches this young man in his teens from Macedonia, whose father said Macedonia is not big enough for your appetite. You're going to need a bigger empire, and that young man will be Alexander, and he's going to go on and conquer the Persian Empire, and he's going to conquer quite a bit of land before, at the age of 32, his army has a mutiny and actually poisons him to death by most accounts. Dies a very violent death, drinking too much wine, especially with probably arsenic in it. And these guys set a great foundation, though, for how to live life. Guys like Epicurus and Epicurean, if people called themselves Epicureans, I believe is how you pronounce it. Thomas Jefferson was somebody like this. This guy's all about happiness, and he argues happiness, and this is true, is not easy. To attain happiness daily, you're going to have to get up, make your bed to start, get that dopamine on the brain, and then do some little things throughout the day. Make sure you're working out, exercising. There's a famous quote, I believe, by him: "If you're not happy with what you have, you won't be happy with what you get." And he is somebody who's really pushing for that happiness, and people need to seek it out, and again, work and attain it.